History is a lie, from the book When Scotland Was Jewish. As cursory inspection will affirm, many prominent Scotsmen look typically Scottish. In fact, they appear rather dark and Semitic. Yet, here they are, Scottish aristocrats. The Scottish royal Stuarts were equally dark and Semitic in appearance.
Talking about key Africans who have played the part in European history.
Of Charles II's dusky appearance, his mother, Queen Henrietta Maria, had been half mortified, writing after her confinement that the child was so dark she was ashamed of him. He was quickly dubbed the Black Boy.
Was it? I just want to ask a question right at the beginning. Have these people been written out of history? Have they been forgotten by most of us? And how hard was it to tease them out?
Well, Florence, what delicious masterpiece have you prepared for us this time?
Well, for you, my queen.
In the 10th century in Scotland, the king was called Dub mac Mael Coluim. This is beyond interesting because the old Scottish meaning of dub is black, as you can see from this old dictionary. And in old Wikipedia depictions of the man, he was shown as follows, but this has since been replaced. If you read on, you'll see that he was called the Black. Further to this, in the book The Mystery and Legends of Scotland, the author confirms the existence of purely black people. We see one of them in the person of Kenneth the Niger. During the 10th century, Kenneth the Niger ruled over 3 provinces in Scotland. The archaeologist and writer David McRitchie declared that the Moors dominated Scotland as late as the time of the Saxon kings. So late as the 10th century, 3 of the provinces of Scotland were wholly black, and the supreme rulers of these were the Black Kings of Scotland. You will also note that Scottish royalty was intimately related to English royalty through various bloodlines. On the European continent, we continue to find influential black figures throughout the Middle Ages. In 16th century Italy, we find the medallion depicting an unidentified European king. In 12th century Italy, Moorish philosopher Ibn Rushd is here depicted. And the Black Moors didn't just become kings and queens in Europe, they also show up as rulers of the Byzantine Empire in multiple instances, like Nikephoros II Phocas, Emperor of Byzantium from 912 to 969. He is described in the Relatio of Luitprand of Cremona as very briskly through the length and thickness of his hair, in color and Ethiopian, one whom it would not be pleasant to meet in the middle of the night. And yet, this is his depiction, really nothing like the man. Here again we see the iconoclasts at work. But where they changed some icons, they could not get all the references. John II Komnenos, viewed by many as one of the greatest emperors of Byzantium, who ruled from 1118 to 1143, is described as a man of medium height, with black hair and black skin, and for this reason, he is still called the Moor. The reference can be found in William of Tyre's Chronicon, 1523. As you can see again, his post-iconoclast depictions look nothing like the written first-hand accounts. So too goes the description of his son who followed him on the throne, Manuel I Komnenos, Emperor of Byzantium. He was described by his contemporary Nikitas Koniates as follows: a certain black-skinned Ethiopian. They acclaimed him Emperor of the Romans and led him about in procession with a splendid crown on his head. But unlike his father, his image, although hard to find, depicts him as shown. And the list goes on. Leszek II, the Black of Poland, 13th century. Zawisza the Black, the most famous Polish knight. Augustus the Strong, King of Poland. The famous Queen Charlotte with her Moorish Portuguese antecedents. Queen Philippa of Hainault, who was born in 1310 in Valenciennes in France, who had black Moorish ancestry. She married Edward of York. Alexandre Dumas, the famous author of The Three Musketeers, George Bridgetower, the music composer who rivaled with Beethoven, Jacobus Capitine, the famous theologian, and countless knights, judges, dukes, duchesses, viscounts, and various other noble titles. So much so that Europeans started incorporating elements of the black phenotype into their cultural rituals. When one takes a look at the enduring cultural elements that were started in medieval Europe, some interesting practices emerge, the first one being the wearing of the wig. The practice started in the courtroom, and historical texts show that until the 17th century, lawyers were expected to appear in court with clean, short hair and beards. Wigs made their first appearance in a courtroom purely and simply because that's what was being worn outside it. The reign of Charles II, 1660 to 1685, made wigs essential wear for polite society. So then, who was the general population trying to imitate? They were trying to imitate the king, Charles II. Charles II, 1630 to 1685, otherwise known as the Merry Monarch, was a gargantuan baby. At 4 months, he already looked, his mother complained, like a 1-year-old. From the age of 12, he took part in English Civil War battles and was described as a tall black man in parliamentary wanted posters. By now, you know the drill. If Charles II was described as a tall black man, why would he be depicted as such on his paintings shown in Wikipedia? Nevertheless, the imitation of his natural hair and that of traditional black nobility started to influence the very aspects of European culture. In these pictures, we can even see how the medieval wigs imitate Kemetic hairstyles, even down to how the curly hair rests on the shoulders. So here it is important to ask, if these wigs were not made to mimic or copy African hairstyles, whose hair were they imitating? Surely not the natural European hairstyle, as the tight, curly nature of the wigs cannot be found in that population. And there is only one people on earth with this type of kinky hair, and it is the Black African. As the YouTube channel Straight Up said, if they could choose any type of hairstyle, why would they choose these particular African hairstyles in so many instances, and especially in royalty and high society? Another Black in History channel gem, along with the already mentioned The Debunker and Mr. Theory on X. Do check them out. But women of medieval and late medieval Europe also copied another defining feature of Black women. One feature that was in recent times denied or mocked, but that has become so sought after today that women are now paying large sums of money to imitate and obtain: the large posterior. And in Europe, they went as far as creating appendages such as the bustle to specifically amplify the woman's posterior. The sole purpose of the device was to give European women the appearance of having a larger behind. Just to give you an idea of how popular this body augmentation procedure has become, in 2020, 397,000 women underwent butt lift procedures. And that's not counting the large number of women who spend countless hours in the gym to gain more mass in that specific area. I strongly suspect that lipstick was also invented for the same reasons. That is, to imitate the Black woman's natural, luscious lips. This is something I will look into later. This doesn't mean that Black women are more beautiful than their counterparts, or vice versa. It just shows that Black women in positions of power influenced medieval European society to a point where their features were associated with beauty and power, and were thus imitated. In the same way that the reverse is now becoming true for many Black women who have, for some time, tried to imitate the hairstyles of white women. I strongly suspect that lipstick was also invented for the same reasons. That is, to imitate the Black woman's natural, luscious lips. This is something I will look into later. When Benjamin Franklin, of all people, said the following, then we must understand that the situation we have been portrayed by mainstream historians is at least inaccurate, and at worst, dishonest. And I quote, "Why should the Palatine Boers, Germans, be suffered to swarm into our settlements, and by herding together establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens, who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs, any more than they can acquire our complexion?" Which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionably very small. All Africa is black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America, exclusive of the newcomers, wholly so. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also, the Saxons only excepted, who with the English make the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. There is one part of this Franklin quote that is often left out or ignored, and that can only be found in select books. It is that when Benjamin Franklin wrote this essay in 1751, the black German king, George II, is sitting on the throne of England. But for now, one must be thinking, if there were so many black people in Europe, where did they all go? And this next section gives us a good clue of what happened. When historians show that the iconoclast movement was primarily an effort to remove all images and icons depicting black people in a position of power, or as deities, these historians are labeled as historical revisionists. And yet, it is not just a few images that show that there was a substantial black nobility in Europe before 1453. But in fact, despite centuries of sustained effort to suppress and erase this African presence, there still remains a large body of evidence that still shows this. In 1352, when Jacob van Merlant made his famous painting of Charlemagne killing a Moorish leader, this is how he drew the Moorish leader, as a black African. The pillars of history sing the wisdom that will build our tomorrow. Historical revisionists, in fact, are those who have closed their eyes to the abundance of evidence showing that black people, in a second wave of civilizing influence, revived Europe and gave it the foundation for its renaissance. After having invented agriculture in 9500 BC, and after having spawned the two most influential civilizations in ancient times, Kemet, better known as ancient Egypt, and Sumer, it is black Africans that injected into Europe and the Levant writing, science, religion, and culture. These were inherited by the Roman Empire, which then collapsed in the 5th century AD, and so began the long collapse of European society until the return of the Africans in the 8th century, when the blacks, this time as the Moors, re-injected into Europe what ultimately became the spark of modernization. In the 800 years that the Moors occupied Spain, the ethnic makeup of these Moors changed over time. It is the early wave of these Moors that were the most influential, and it happens to be the same early waves that were, in great majority, black African. And they came in such numbers and with such knowledge that they gained significant positions of power in pre-Renaissance European history. And it is this group of black Africans that joined with the remnants of the first civilizing wave of Africans, a few of them still present in Europe. These two groups joined to form a new elite class throughout Europe, and you will see evidence of their presence through multiple artifacts and historical records today. When we show that Renaissance Europe was, in great majority, sparked by Africans, it does not mean that Europeans or Asiatics are not capable of civilization building. What we are showing, however, is that Europe of the Dark Ages benefited from the technology, science, philosophy, medicine, and architecture that were reintroduced by a majority black African elite in the early periods of the Moors, which transformed over the centuries into a nobility class with evidence littered all over medieval texts. This is the Without History channel. Through primary sources and peer-reviewed research, we bring you perspectives on history that are seldom shared, the often omitted African presence and African influence on ancient civilizations and modernization. This channel is only possible thanks to the generous contributions of those who understand the role of history for generations of all ethnicities. You can find ways to support us in the video description. You will also find a multitude of sources for those who like to dive deep into these subjects.
Enemies made out that he was a black bastard, begotten by a black Scotsman. This is just another confirmation regarding some Stuart monarchs we covered on this page. King James I was described as ruddy in complexion, a reddish-brown like the biblical King David, another parallel authors of his time noted, while his mother, Mary of Scots complexion, was described as being of a delicate brunette, a light brown, similar to her cousin Elizabeth I of England.
In the book Memoirs of the Secret Services of John Mackey, he provides meticulous descriptions of many of the influential figures of his time. Of these, one of the most interesting descriptions is that of Mr. Methuen, ambassador to the King of Portugal. He is said to be a man of intrigue, but very muddy in his complexion, and manners much of a Spaniard, a tall black man 50 years old. Here, the author gives us the general description of the men living in Spain, the ones we call the Moors. In his own words of his first account, they are tall men of black complexion. And this description of the Moors is not unique. As we saw, it shows up in paintings, it shows up in carvings, and it also shows up in innumerable medieval texts. But the Africans were not the only Moors. Arabs made a good contingent of the Moor population. But the sheer number of black Africans as Moors caused the contemporary artists and writers to depict them as black with clearly identifiable black features. One of the most influential Moor factions was the Almoravids, a group that brought many inventions to Europe, including the horseshoe arch. Coming from present-day Mauritania and Mali, when they were majority black, the Almoravids were depicted and almost universally described as black by their contemporaries. In the book Historia Compostelana, they are described as follows. After almost 3 years, the Almoravids, Moabites, whom the heat of the sun makes them similar to the Ethiopians, invaded the fortresses and dependent towns of Toledo and attacked with more force than usual. The book also goes on to state that, before they ruled, they had worn their veil, litham, in the desert only against the heat and cold, as the Arabs do, and were mostly of dark, asmar complexion. And the Arabic word asmar describes a color that is as dark as coal. And their leader was described as brown-skinned with kinky hair. Yet another leader of the Almoravids, Abu Bakr ibn Umar, was depicted as shown, as you can see, unmistakably black. In 711 AD, when the Moors led their conquest of Spain, the whole of Europe was going through turmoil. 3 centuries before, the Roman Empire had collapsed. Europe was now divided between East and West, and soon the Vikings would begin their reign of terror. Malnutrition, illiteracy, disease, and lawlessness were rampant throughout most of the region. The arrival of the Moors forced the unification of rival factions under the banner of the Church. It also caused the rapid adaptation of European society to what they perceived as a new threat to their way of life. But as much as the Moors were perceived to be a threat, they brought a long list of civilizing elements to Europe: the Arabic numerals, algebra and trigonometry, medicine, agriculture techniques, architecture and music, waterworks, navigation, and papermaking. These are just a few of the elements that Europe inherited from the invaders that had come from the shores of northern Africa. Among these items, one can find the classic Greek texts. These had been translated into Arabic by researchers from the Islamic Empire. Yes, the Greek texts we have today are, in fact, texts that were given back to Europe by the Africans. Once they arrived in Europe, these blacks started showing up in increasing frequency as royals and nobles all over Europe. And to some Europeans, they had an all too familiar look, that of their deity.
We also covered sources describing his grandson, Charles II. Wanted posters after the Battle of Worcester describe him being tall and of a sable hue. This is what the color sable looks like, a dark brown color. We can see why he was nicknamed Black Boy. The Stuarts and their relatives in this time period weren't usually as dark as him, which reminds us of King Solomon, darker than his predecessors. This is how modern Hollywood makes fun of this history, knowing it will go over 99.9% of so-called black people's heads.
Because of the consistent iconoclast efforts, it is difficult for most to realize the true presence of Africans as nobles in Europe. It is even more difficult to admit the role of Africans as venerated deities. But that was precisely the intended outcome of the iconoclast movement. Masquerading as an exercise to remove icons altogether, its real objective was to redefine them. And I argue that this movement never really ended. It went from the destruction of black icons as early as the 8th century AD to a new form, where historians are knowingly hiding notable black presence in medieval Europe. And what they will instead focus on are exceptions that happen to reinforce the narrative that black people only had a role of servitude. There is no better example of this than the transformation of Queen Elizabeth I, from her first-hand accounts to her repainted figures. In the Calendar of State Papers and Manuscripts relating to English affairs, on page 1058, when Ambassador Giovanni Michiel writes, Of this sister of hers, I must remind your serenity that after the repudiation of Queen Catherine, the present Queen's mother, she was born of Henry VIII and of his second wife, Anne Boleyn, an Englishwoman and of noble birth, although 2 years afterwards she was beheaded for adultery. My Lady Elizabeth was born in September 1533, so she is now 23 years old. She is a young woman whose mind is considered no less excellent than her person, although her face is comely rather than handsome. But she is tall and well-formed, with a good skin, although swarthy. And if you wondered what swarthy means in Old English, it means of dark complexion, or black. And yet, when we look at portraits and paintings for Elizabeth, she is depicted with the whitest of white skins, with what happens to be curly red hair. Take a note of this, as it will come to be of importance as we progress. In yet another account of Elizabeth, in the book English and Scottish History, she is described by Sir James Melville as follows. Her hair was more reddish than yellow, curled in appearance naturally. She desired to know of me what color of hair was reputed best, and whether my queen's hair or hers were best, and which of them two was the fairest. Well, it is not uncommon at all for black women to be born with curly red hair. As you can see in these many examples, swarthy of dark complexion with curly red hair, and again, swarthy dark complexion with curly red hair. And if you are still doubting that iconoclasm erased as many images of black nobility as they could find, here is yet another example. In the book Queen Elizabeth by Alison Weir, Sir Francis Walsingham is spoken of by the Queen as follows. Walsingham was nearing 40. He had been educated at Cambridge, Gray's Inn, and Padua, and become an MP. Later, he had come under the patronage of Cecil, who had offered him a post at court, and later placed him in charge of his secret agents. Because of his swarthy complexion and black clothes, Elizabeth nicknamed Walsingham her Moor. As we have just seen, Sir Francis Walsingham was a Moor and was swarthy of complexion. But if you search for his images, this is what you get. Someone who is the farthest away from swarthy. It wasn't just England. The Black Moors were everywhere in Europe, and they showed up in very surprising areas. It wasn't just one event that reduced the number of black Europeans to such low levels. It was the compounding effect of multiple trends. The Reconquista, the Inquisition, the forced exodus, and the fleeing of the Jacobites. After the invasion of the Iberian Peninsula by the predominantly black Moors, Europe rebelled against Islam, the new religion brought in by the Africans and the Arabs, the Reconquista. And so, from the 8th century to the 15th century, war and cultural reversal had become the trend. And it is during this period that the brutal inquisitions took place. Their aim was to root out and kill Jews or Protestant converts. During this period, being suspected of being a Jew or a Protestant would be enough to get someone executed. And it is important here to note that, in an effort to integrate into European society during the Reconquista, many previously Muslim blacks had converted to Judaism and the Protestant faith, both religions that they found more conservative and thus more compatible with their old Islamic faith. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, was aimed at consolidating the Catholic Church's power by targeting heretics, among whom were conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity, and moriscos, Muslims who had been baptized as Christians. The Inquisition employed brutal methods, including torture, to extract confessions and enforce orthodoxy within the Spanish kingdom. During this period, many Jews declared their conversion to Christianity to escape persecution, but these conversos remained targets of suspicion and violence, leading to widespread fear and eventual expulsion. In 1492, the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella issued an edict that forced Jews to either convert to Christianity or leave Spain. This expulsion had a catastrophic impact on the Jewish community, stripping many of their possessions and forcing them into exile. Many of these Jews were Moors that had converted to Judaism to escape persecution. The Inquisition also targeted the Moriscos, baptized Muslims, who were expelled in the early 17th century, further emphasizing the Inquisition's role in religious and ethnic cleansing. But many of the blacks, from Ireland to Spain, chose exile to the new land, especially islands such as Jamaica. In the book, Origin of the Anglo-Saxon Race, the author clearly shows that from the late 8th century, before the arrival of the Vikings, whom they fought, a great majority of the inhabitants of Scotland and Ireland were black. And they are clearly spoken about in historical descriptions, but also in their names. Black, Blackman, Blakeman, Blake, Sward, from Swarthy, Stuart, Seward, and others. It is these black people who centuries later, though in fewer numbers, became the Jacobites, the supporters of the Black King James, also known as Jacobus. These Jacobites were exported en masse to the new land in the Americas. As it shows here in the book Jacobite Gleanings, The Transportation in 1745 by J. Macbeth Forbes, it is, in short, a passenger manifest of the Jacobites that were taken to Antigua. And when we say that they were taken, it means they were forced into exile to the islands. What is interesting here is that both their names and their physical descriptions are given. And as you can see, the great majority are black. William Blake, black curly hair. Douglas Campbell, brown complexion. Remember that Dougal and Doug from Old English mean black, so many who carry that name come from old black families. Alex Katach, black, ruddy, and healthy. And it's not just the top of the list. Further down, John Kennedy, black. Angus McIntosh, black, very strong. And the list goes on. Although the vast majority of black people who arrived in America came directly from Africa, European blacks, smaller in number comparatively, were forced or chose exile over persecution to the new land. And it is these forces, Reconquista, Inquisition, forced exile, that decimated the large number of blacks in Europe. And their likenesses were then systematically removed from all icons in representation of influence, creating an illusion of an exclusively European medieval history, one where the Afro-descendant can no longer see himself or herself in the nobility of days past. But equally as damaging, they have created a circle of people who have been born into this lie, have never had the time nor the courage to question it, and who now use it as a justification for ethnic supremacy. And yet, as history shows us, nothing could be further from the truth. And that once again, as they did in 9500 BC, when the black Natufians shared the secret of agriculture with all, as they did from 3000 BC to 500 BC, when they taught the Greeks everything they know, the Africans, this time wearing turbans, gave to the struggling Europeans the seeds of civilization once more. And for this, as we shall see in this next section, they were once more venerated as deities. In the book Russian Icons by Father Vladimir Ivanov, recently rediscovered, we find the most interesting collection of Christian icons. It is of high interest for two reasons. Number one, it depicts the various Christian icons as black. And number two, this is not found in Western Europe, but well in Eastern Europe, in Russia. This means that black people were venerated as deities from Spain to France, Italy, Germany, and all the way to Russia. In sum, all over Europe, there are at least 500 black Madonnas in Europe, not counting the ones hidden in the Vatican, 128 in France alone. And you need to remember that these icons survived multiple waves of iconoclasm. This means that in the past, they would have been ubiquitous throughout Europe, before the great artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo were commissioned to start painting the classic, Europeanized face of Jesus that we know today. So then, as always, if we ask the critical questions, if the mainstream historical narrative is true, and that black people have never achieved anything of note in history, why then were they depicted and venerated all over Europe? Even more intriguing, what were black people doing in so many depictions, descriptions, sculptures, and plays in Europe at all? For those who have been listening, it is simply because they were present in such numbers, and it yielded such influence, that even the planned erasure and systematic destruction of the icons survived, from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, from Germany to Italy. Before we leave you, here are a few more notable figures of black Africans in medieval Europe. This is a statue of Philip II of Spain. Philip was no ordinary man. His father was Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. In this portrait, we have a count depicting Christian, John George, and Augustus. Christian was a Scandinavian monarch. We have John George, Elector of Saxony. The last one to the right is Augustus, also Elector of Saxony. Their names are engraved on the coin, as you can see.
A description of the Western Islands of Scotland containing a full account of their situation. It says the inhabitants of this isle are generally well proportioned, and their complexion is for most part black. And this is a crest, right? Just an example, I threw this in there. This is the coat of arms of Ivy William, 1485, Ivy family. The same book, a description of the Western Islands of Scotland. And we're talking about the Isle of Arran, or the island of Arran. It says the inhabitants of this isle are well proportioned, generally brown, and some of black complexion. They enjoy a good state of health and have a genius for all callings or employ. But we're going to get to some very important parts of the book. All right, so we're going to begin with this person right here, which he's describing as, his name is Charles, known as the Duke of Somerset, Master of the Horse, of the ancient family of Seymour, who made so great a figure in the reign of Edward VI. I remember, these are the people he's spying on. So these are the Jacobites, all right? We're going to go ahead, all right, and get to this part of the book where it describes what he looks like. It says he is of middle stature, well-shaped, and very black complexion, a lover of music and poetry, of good judgment but reason, of great hesitation in his speech, wants expression. He is about 42 years old.
Here is yet another, James Vernon Esquire. He was a clerk in the secretary's office in King Charles II's reign. He is described as a tall, thin man of brown complexion. But when we look at his Wikipedia portrait, it looks nothing like the man. For all we know, this painting could have been misattributed. But this would mean that they have misattributed thousands of portraits, and at no point in time do these misattributions show a black man in the stead of a white man in a position of prominence. And here we have another coin depicting Augustus, Elector of Saxony. The Saxons were Lutherans, a major branch of Protestantism. And as we mentioned before, many Moors converted to Protestantism to escape persecution during the Reconquista and the Inquisitions. Alessandro de' Medici, also called Il Moro, the Moor, due to his dark complexion. He was ruler of Florence from 1530 to his death in 1537. He was also the first Medici to rule Florence as a hereditary monarch. And here we have a fresco depicting a tournament of knights. No comments.
And when you see the prophets, you're going to see them as men of color. Notice here his garment is white, but the skin complexion on the prophets, they're all dark-skinned men. Because when you read the scriptures, you always read about the prophets. They always describe themselves as dark-skinned men. And our forefathers, black men, they painted them as that image of being men of color. But what happened? Remember this. 1453, the Renaissance. We're going to go to Spain, the history and art. We're going to go to page 60. I want you guys to look at this. Now these women are what color? White. What color are their fingertips? Black. Wow, they got their fingertips dipped in chocolate? No, they weren't dipped in chocolate. They were hired to paint over the images. Why their fingertips black but their skin is white because they had iconoclasts, 1453, paint over these images.
No, it is not Afro-descendants that should be labeled as historical revisionists. If anything, Afro-descendants have had to summon an inordinate amount of courage and intellectual curiosity to search for evidence that has for too long been denied. Courage to face ridicule, in the face of an abundance of images and icons that shout from the frames of history that those who would like to rule by fear have failed to erase their contribution to history. Historical revisionists are these figures of authority who have known these facts for decades, often centuries, but haven't come forth with them, and somehow they have maintained the appellation of historians. A true historian has a duty to the truth of the past, and for those who have forgotten, they are gatekeepers of the consciousness of the future. And in this, most have failed us, and they instead rely on a Babel tower of lies and confusing narratives. And now that the knowledge of the African contribution to history, the missing centerpiece to the history of man, is being told correctly, it will do for both Black and non-Black generations what fake legislations and empty speeches and the miseducation system was not able to do: free our minds from fear, hatred, and inadequacy. Again, a huge shout out to all these channels and researchers. What they do is simply amazing, and each one brings their unique perspectives and findings on true Black and African history that will not be covered in the mainstream. Kuro Aha, Re-Educated TV, The Debunker, Mr. Theory on Twitter, and all those that I have mentioned in the video description. And now to my supporters. You guys are the Knights of Enlightenment. You all deserve the title of Initiates, the High Priest of Aswan, Protectors of the Oba, Great Griot to the Mansa, Counselors of Shaka, Priest of the Ethiopian Churches, Cavalry of the Almoravid Kings, Sword of the King of the Congo Empire, Advisors to the King Ngoya, Golden Stool of Ashanti. I salute you all. Even the ones that haven't clicked the like button and subscribed yet. Yes, you. I cast a spell on you to press the like button and the hype button. If you like this content, drop us a comment. Above all, share it with everyone you think can benefit from it. We hear a lot about the negative voices, but it warms our hearts to hear your positive comments. Join us and see how those who are said to be without history birthed civilization itself.